All right, good afternoon. Can you guys hear me? Why is everybody sitting way back there? We got to see the whites of your eyes if we're going to engage. Well, I appreciate everybody coming. Panel, we're going to talk about streamlined acquisition, what we can do, a couple different organizations. I'm going to moderate a little bit. I'll kick it off and pass down, introduce some of our guest speakers, and then really looking at the opportunity to answer some questions and really engage in a back and forth, because that's what we really want to do mostly. So looking for your participation. And the guys way in the back, I can't tell. So who was here for lunch with Secretary Gertz? I know you guys were. Okay, so he talked a lot about where he is. So Mike Moran, I am the principal military deputy for ASNRDA for Secretary Gertz in the building. So Navy Marine Corps supporting the Secretary. And I think the crux of his presentation really captured where he's trying to drive the Navy and the Marine Corps in acquisition. And I'll start with the premise of what is acquisition. Because I think we all get stuck on just the procurement side, that's acquisition, and the buying part of the business that we struggle or are slow or sometimes not as effective as we can be. Tell you where the Secretary is trying to bring it, it's really about the entire acquisition system, from requirements generation to appropriate funding to execution, test, and delivery. It's the whole shooting match. And one of the things, when you talk about streamlining acquisition, what do we have to get right? I think you have to go back and look kind of at history and what have we gotten wrong, right? In the big programs, what have we done? So two premises. One is we do struggle in some of the big programs, but I will tell you that we have a lot of great examples where we're moving pretty effectively, pretty quickly on a number of fronts, and many of the programs you don't read about because they are being effective and they are going through the process in a very quick and agile manner, meeting fleet needs. So we spent a lot of time talking about the ones that struggle. So I think what we're trying to do on the Navy Marine Corps side is let's holistically take a look at how do we come together from the very beginning to establish a program. How are requirements put together? Are we putting requirements together in isolation? I.e., hey, here's what the fleet gap is. Okay, great, thanks. But are we fully informing ourselves in that conversation on requirements about what does it cost? What's the maturity of the technology? Can we truly acquire it? Do we have a supply base, a supply chain that can manage it? So is that being fully informed before the requirements are set in stone? Because a lot of times I think when you look back as we're fighting an execution for decisions that were made that were not that fully informed piece. So what the Secretary's doing, and really, really strong partnership with CNO and VCNO, is driving a conversation together, so let's be fully informed before we commit on a program. Absolutely critical we do that, right? And then do we really know the cost? Do we have a really, truly good independent cost analysis of what we are trying to acquire, and we are allocating the appropriate budget, right? So we heard a lot about affordability. And affordability in my mind is not how much money do you take, how cheap can you get it, is can we afford to buy it? Do we have enough money in our budget in the Navy and Marine Corps to go buy what we're planning to go buy? So the only way you make that determination is truly understanding what it is you're trying to buy. So that upfront work is critical. So requirements, acquisition, and resourcing have to come together. They are not separate pillars. And if you look at, the big A in acquisition, some of you out there have been in this business, and the circles are really big and they intersect in a really small area. That has to change. That small area has to grow, and we have to do this together. So in my mind, where Secretary Gertz is driving us is a collaborative environment where we can really take the fleet gaps, understand what the fleet needs to go win the fight, then collectively go determine what the actual requirements are, what does it cost, and then how do we best acquire it, using all of the tools available to us to be smart buyers, right? And I will tell you, in the beginning, that requires industry. So you'll see draft RFPs. We're going out to industry. We want industry feedback. We got to know what the art of the possible is with industry. We have to do this together. or we will fail. We will fail. So to me, I'm going to let the other speakers get into some of their viewpoints, but for me, if we're going to be successful at going at speed and at scale, as Secretary Gertz has challenged us, we've got to get it right up front. We've got to get the stage for success set early. And then go let people do what they do. We have really talented teams on the government industry side. There's no doubt in my mind. There's really great examples of really good success out there that's happening all around us. I really, truly believe Secretary Gertz is changing the culture, at least internal. It's a big ship move. It takes a little bit of time to move. But what he didn't talk to, and I'll just give you one more thing before I introduce the first participant here, is the culture. And there's a question about can you change, the middle tier, the frozen middle? Can you do that? My answer is yes. And one of the things that Secretary Gertz is doing, and I've never seen it as aggressively as he's doing it, one is delegation. He is delegating authorities down the chain in a way I've never seen in my 35 years, certainly 20 years in this business. He is really pushing decision space down. So he's trusting. He's trusting his workforce. And one of the great examples, I'll tell you, an ACT strategy document. Who here in this room knows what an ACT strategy document is? Right? It is supposed to be the pillar, the definition of how we go acquire a product. In years past, we're talking anywhere from 80 to 220 pages, depending on what you're buying, of step-by-step what we're going to do, what kind of contract strategy are, how we're going to test some things, how we're going to mature technology. So written out in great gory detail. Much of this stuff is statutory requirement that we have to be able to explain how we're going to go acquire these things. How that happened in the past, and I say in the past because it's changing, is you write these very long documents. The program team puts it together. They work with the resource sponsor, the requirements folks. They put this together. It takes a long, long time to put together. And then it goes through a sequential review process through every iterative step of the chain of command, up through whatever organization that program comes from, up through the AS and RDA staff. And if it's going to OSD, as a large ACAT 1D type of program that OSD has oversight, it goes through that staff. In time, or at least in history, that was a 9 to 11-month process to get the document, the guiding document for acquisition, done and completed. Crazy. I would tell you, and probably get at school, some programs started before that was even signed because the money showed up, the teams were in place, we had to get the ball rolling. So what Secretary Gertz has done is said, hey, what are the 11 principal things that Congress has mandated that we have to have an ACT strategy, and let's just focus on those things. And let's not make it gory detail where we write paragraph and prose about the acquisition. Let's just go talk about the issues. And instead of having sequential review, I'm going to give everybody 2 weeks, once the program team has it, and you can do it in a PowerPoint. Address each of the primary issues or concerns you have in 1 or 2 charts on a PowerPoint. So let's make it no more than 15 charts. Address the issues that are most concerned so we know what we're going to go acquire, we know what how we're going to go do it. And then we're going to give everybody in the chain 2 weeks to look at it, and then I'm going to get everybody together, bring your concerns, bring your issues to the table. We'll talk through it at that point, and if we can resolve everything, I'll sign it at the table right then and there. I can't tell you what a profound impact that has on the teams that have gone through that experience. That 9-month process, 10, 11-month process has skinnied down to weeks, no more than a month in some cases. And the team is off and running. I mean, that's empowerment, that's a change, it's culturally, right? Should give you real power that you now have control over your program. That's just one of many examples that he's trying to instill down into the programs to drive that culture that acknowledges speed, agility, to meet the demand of the fleet. And that's what we got to go do. So with that, I'm going to introduce the first panel member, Vice Admiral Nick Hine from the UK. He's a 2nd Sea Lord and Deputy Chief of the Naval Staff. He's a submariner by trade. He was commissioned in 1985, made rank in 2019, Vice Admiral. He commanded HMS Blackwater, Talent, and Westminster. So without further ado, Nick Hine.
Thanks, Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon on behalf of the UK. So, firstly, some of the language I'm going to use is different, and that's just a common people separated by the same language. And forgive me, so our acquisition language may also be slightly different. So if I do say something you don't understand, please come back to me in questions. The second thing would be to say, actually, everything that Secretary Gert said today, I think we all echo. So, I mean, I could just say thank you very much, any questions, because there's nothing that he said today that I would disagree with. And in actual fact, I think in lots of areas we are in violent agreement. In some areas, I would even go further. I'll talk a little bit about what the UK is up to, and then some specifics, and then we can come back to any details later on in questions. The UK is undergoing an acquisition review as part of our Modernising Defence programme. That's sort of not really very great news, except to say that it's the 5th acquisition review we've undertaken in the past 7 years. Two things immediately spring from that. One is that we don't appear to understand or appear to be able to recognise what it is we're trying to achieve, hence the constant need to revisit our conversation. And the second thing is we clearly haven't got it right yet, otherwise we'd have stopped with the review and got on with the acquisition. There are, though, 3 principles, I think, that sort of hold true in any of the acquisition reviews that we've done, and indeed in this one. The first one is clarity. And what do I mean by clarity? We have to be clear as the customer what it is we want. Now that sounds absolutely patently obvious, doesn't it? And indeed self-evident. But it's not. And we change our minds. And people like me are in post for a period of time, normally 2 to 3 years, and then somebody will replace me, and he or she will have a different view, and they will change their minds. And people all the way through the organization have a view and indeed add value, or at least that's what they think, and they will change their minds. So clarity of what it is we're trying to achieve from the outset is absolutely vital in any of this process. The second thing is pace and agility, echoing what Secretary Gert said earlier on today. That doesn't mean that you go as fast as you can. It means you go as fast as is necessary. But it does mean you go faster than everybody in this room will feel comfortable with. Because if you're not going faster than you're comfortable with, then you're actually not at the boundary, at the cutting edge, on the edge of where we need to be. And I think everything I've heard over the last 36 hours or so since we've been here suggests that the technological revolution, the way the world is changing, and means that our acquisition processes are no longer fit for purpose. In the UK, I have a sort of a rule, inverted commas. If it's not going to be in service in 5 years and it is not a major procurement, I am not interested. And I won't deal with it because we do not have the time and we do not have the capacity to allow these programs to run for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and then actually get to the point where we started off to design a horse and we ended up with a camel, and then we're surprised that the camel doesn't do what the horse was supposed to do in the first place. The second thing in that sort of piece is agility. We as an organization, and I include industry and ourselves as part of that, must be agile enough to react to changes in technology. There was a very interesting conversation earlier in the week about software. If we think we are going to procure software in the same way we procure a warship, we are delusional. But we do. Certainly in the UK, the same processes apply to buying a piece of software, as to buying a nuclear submarine. That cannot be right. And then the final thing in that sort of list of the acquisition review is people. We have to have the people in the organization, both in industry and in the military, who are prepared to challenge how we do our business. Mike talked about culture. There is always a danger that we grow up, we are products of our experience rather than our history, and we get to a point where we have a culture of acceptance. We accept what was done, we accept that what is being done is right, and we don't challenge it. Without the challenge function, without a constant challenge function, none of these things will change. The acquisition review will undoubtedly do some things in the margins, but it won't change actually how we do our business. So the mod's going through an acquisition review, as I say, the latest in a series over a period of time. The fundamental thing from my perspective that the mod will need to deal with to enable me to do my business better is to remove the bureaucracy, is to remove the layers, is to remove the added value that everybody adds, because actually it has to go through a process. And if anything comes across your desk, as it comes across your desk, you can't just let it pass. You must do something with it and add a bit of value, and so it goes on. So by the time it gets right the way through the process, we've added both time and therefore money, neither of which we ever have enough of. So we're trying very hard to run some Pathfinder programs in order to try and shorten the acquisition timeline, clarity of requirement, agility in flight, and the right people. And we have a program, the Type 31E, a frigate program, where we're going from design, initial gate, as we would call it, through to the first one in the water inside 4 years. Now, that's a pretty racy timeline, and we might not get it right. It might be 4 years and 3 months, or it might be 4 years and 6 months. But what it won't be is 15 years. So we need to set the bar high and accept we will just miss, rather than setting the bar low and still missing. In doing so, by challenging ourselves, we will endeavor to make the process work faster. We will endeavor to make the process work more agilely and in a more streamlined fashion. Without that, then we are doomed to repeating what we've always done. And in terms of the performance, cost, and time envelope in which we all deal, we all know that the first thing that goes is cost. Somebody will take some money away. We always trade performance, because that's the only place we go, because we don't own time. So we end up with something that inevitably costs more, does less, and takes longer. That can't be right. So everything that Secretary Gertz was saying earlier on today, we are absolutely square behind. I think what's really interesting from our perspective, if we talk about the UK and the US, and all of the conversations I've had this week, are all about how we try and do this better together. Because if we can do it better together, then what we won't have to do is we won't have to do separate processes and then work out how we join it up. It would be far better to join it up at the beginning and then move forward together at pace. So I offer that as my sort of start of a 10, and then I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
All right, our next panel member is Mr. William Williford. He's Executive Director of the Marine Corps Systems Command. He's been in SES since 2012, 30 years of service with DOD, with industry, and as a federal civilian. So, Bill.
So good afternoon. So Admiral Moran, Second Sea Lord, thank you for having me on the panel this afternoon. Very excited about being here. Just give you a little bit about what Marine Corps Systems Command is. So we are the combat weapons systems and information technology purchasers for the Marine Corps down in Quantico. Have about 2,500 military and civilian folks down there doing that job. We're acquainted with PEO Land Systems that does all of our heavy equipment and heavy gear that we have. And so I just wanted to give you kind of a lay of the land of what Marine Syscom is, because I have a lot of people ask. So we're one of the 6 naval system commands out there, and so I just wanted to give you that background. But some of the things that we talked about with Streamline acquisition, and you heard up here from the first 2 speakers, Congress has really given us, I think, all the authorities that we need in the National Defense Authorization Act 2016 through 2019. They kept giving us additional authorizations in that process. And OSD and the community has been trying to get their hands around each of those accelerated acquisition avenues and ways to go forward. And so what we have identified at Marine Corps Systems Command are a number of ways to use those authorities to get capability quicker and get it out to the fleet. And so I'll give you some examples, but I want to go back and tell you a little bit about those. So things like other transaction authority, partnership intermediary agreements, 804, Section 804, which is mid-tier acquisition. Those efforts help you streamline your process maybe get around the requirements in the JSIDS process, maybe get around some of the funding challenges and issues we have. But here's what I'll tell you. Don't think of any of those as the silver bullet, right? So the bottom line with all the authorities that Congress gave us is that you have to use them in conjunction with the FAR-based process that you currently have. I'll give you an example. So as you develop a ship, as you develop a combat system, you can develop that truck in the FAR-based acquisition. I call it the truck because it's carrying the weapons and carrying the equipment that you need. And then you can look at each one of those pieces of equipment and utilize that accelerated acquisition process, OTAs, PIAs, other methods to get at those capabilities that you can prototype and get out there quickly so that you can get a minimal viable product out there. Probably all of you have heard that. That minimal viable product is transferring from a waterfall methodology where you have a continuous development and passing it off to the next organization to an agile methodology where you have everybody together and everybody pulling the oars in the same direction to be able to do that. So we have utilized those authorities inside Systems Command. We have worked with a number of OTAs across DOD, and we brought in others to utilize those OTAs that we have internal to Marine Corps Systems Command. We have 3 or 4 that we stood up on our own to go through the process. One of the things that we're doing is getting back into sea control with the Navy, so as part of the naval force. And in getting into that sea control environment, we want to make sure that we can put a capability out there, such as anti-ship missile and other things that we need to do to move forward in that sea control mission. So we're trying to make sure that we do that. We also have worked with the Cyber Command in the Marine Corps to come up with a big data analytics capability that we're working with them. And we did that through an OTA process. But again, don't think that OTAs are faster. That process took us 7 months. And the reason that process took us 7 months is because we had to make sure that the language from the legal side was right and that we made sure that we didn't do anything that was illegal on our side to make sure that we could move forward with that process. So one of the things we had to do at the Systems Command is retrain and re-educate our workforce. So as those efficiencies and authorizations came out, we looked at those and we said, well, we've got to retrain our contracting workforce. We've got to retrain our legal workforce. And we've got to make sure that the programmatics and everything are lined up to make sure that we can utilize these authorities that Congress gave us and make sure we get to providing that gear in a better manner out to the Marine Corps. So we have done that. Some of the challenges in that environment have been, one, the speed of educating the workforce and transitioning from a FAR-based environment into that environment to go faster. And then the funding process, making sure that we aligned the funding and had that funding through the POM in order to make sure that we could identify those pieces of gear and avenue that we wanted to go and streamline faster. We're working with our Rapid Capability Office in our Marine Corps Warfighting Lab to make sure that we bring that capability forward as well to transition technologies in a quicker manner. We've worked with the NTEX events, which are the experiments through the naval side, to make sure that we can get capability out as quick as we can. But again, it's a process, and that process takes time in order to, one, re-educate the workforce and be able to bring to bear the capability that we can provide. Again, look forward to any of your questions, sir.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, now our panel's at full strength. You're all in big trouble. So just getting on board. So what we're doing is just kicking it off, having our opening comments. So our next speaker is Rear Admiral Michael Johnston. He's a Director of Acquisition Programs, PEO, for the Coast Guard. Coast Guard Academy grad of 1990. Wow. MIT. He's commanded U.S. Coast Guard's Command, Control, and Comms Engineering Center. So, Mike, please, welcome.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. You probably don't know this, but Admiral Moran and I were classmates, so he's clearly done better than me. No, we went to one class together at UNC for strategic thinking, so all the stuff that he came up with here I agree with, and we talked about at the strategic thinking class, and so I'm on board. I'm on board with that. No, I 2 weeks ago took over as Chief Acquisition Officer for the United States Coast Guard, so I've only been in the job for 2 weeks, so I'm going to use that excuse for a moment. I think I got another 2 weeks, but while I can still say that. And I asked my wife what I should talk about today with this esteemed group, and she said, just stick to the basics and keep it simple. I know you can do that. So listen, Coast Guard acquisitions we're doing more acquisitions now than we have ever done in our history, and in particular in the shipbuilding realm. We're building almost every class of ship, the national security cutters. We just awarded the Polar Security Cutter. We have a Waterways Commerce Cutter on the horizons. We're still doing FRCs, and we're slepping service life extensions for 47s, and we're doing tons and tons of boats. We're doing every single air asset that we have in the Coast Guard, and so it is incredibly, incredibly busy. Previous to being CAO, I was the PO, and running the program managers. They as a group, that's a group of people that like to complain. I love them, but they have lots of issues. It seems like everyone in the world can say no, and very few people can say yes. And so we're trying to change that. We're trying to make it so that they have the ability to get a yes sooner. I went to a show, and a guy described he had a ball, and he had a bunch of trees, and he put them together, and he dropped the ball, and it hit branch, and he said, this is the time that it takes to get work done. All these little branches that it touches, this is the bureaucracy of acquisitions, the paperwork, all the people, the inertia in the middle, and all of them may be adding value, but it takes time, and maybe that value, could be tuned just a little. So then he got a much denser rock, and he threw that down, and it broke through all that stuff, and happened much quicker. And I think that's what we've been working on, meeting at the early in the process, at the highest levels of the organization, and really getting buy-in in the strategy and narrowing down the requirements. And that has facilitated, or that's what we're working on, facilitating much faster conversations, breaking that middle iceberg and getting everybody to yes much, much quicker. The problem is that sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And so with the Polar acquisition, we learned to engage industry early at all levels, at the PM level, at the KO level, and at the CEO level, to really narrow down what is the best way to engage industry to get this faster. What type of incentives really are a mechanism to execute faster? We had several best practices that we work with at the Navy through industry studies and other things that really expedite our acquisition from 10 years to 3. And so, we have a lot of things that, the two greatest aspects about the Coast Guard. Our greatest strength is that we are small, agile, nimble. Our greatest weakness is that we are small and, limited in funds. But both of those things drive us to being very skilled at partnerships. And I think that is the leverage that we are trying to use to speed up our acquisitions and to really make sure that everybody's on board very early on, adding some weight to that rock so that it drives down, it really gets to yes and the answer much, much quicker. The other thing is innovative tools. And that also comes with the partnerships. Industry has some great ideas about it. DHS and DOD are those partners. They have some great ideas about innovative ways to not only speed up the acquisition, but the execution of that acquisition, which is a little bit different and a little bit more nuanced. And how do you, once you bought it, that's when the hard part starts. And that is where you get to delivering capability to the Warfighter sooner in the execution. And so, you know, we can talk about that if we can get to a question, some of the things that we come up with and some of the things that we would like to do. But more than that, I personally am interested in, this is a great forum. I want to thank the Navy League for hosting. This is a great forum to really generate ideas. I've been here all morning, and I tell you, my IQ has jumped up at least 10 points. Just from talking to people and hearing about the things that they have to say and really learning from all you all, you know, what we're doing that's stupid. Man, sometimes we do stupid stuff, I admit that, but I'm only in my job 2 weeks, so not my fault. So sometimes we do things that's stupid, and sometimes, you know, you guys have really great ideas about how we can do the exact same thing, but a little bit better. And so I'm personally am interested and look forward to the opportunity to have that conversation. Thank you. Awesome.
All right, our next panelist is Captain Douglas M. Harrington. He's a Deputy Director, Office of Ship Operations, MARAD, Maine Maritime Academy grad, Shipmaster, U.S. flag oil tanker. Welcome.
Thanks, sir. Good afternoon. So I represent a small agency as well, Maritime Administration, but I heard some common themes here that we're going to talk about a little bit. I'll give you a little insight into what the Maritime Administration is doing today. I'm actually the acting director for my office. My boss, who may be here in the audience, retired last Tuesday. So he said, hey, here you go. We got an acquisition program for 46 ships that are over 44 years old. You need to go ahead and do this. And we're working in conjunction with the Department of Defense to go ahead and do that strategy. So what I've heard today was use all the tools you have, industry days, RFIs. We're on our second RFI that we put out for Navy and for U.S. Transcom to identify ships that are out in the commercial industry that we can buy, reflag to U.S. flag, convert in a U.S. shipyard, and get ready for sea for U.S. Transcom to task at any moment in time. That's a big challenge for us. Like I said, our ships are right now an average age 44 years old. We have ships that were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. I don't have any ship that was built after 2000. So that's a major challenge for us. Our number is 46 ships. That's what we're going for. The good thing is that we represent the Department of Transportation, and we can use our own authorities to help the DoD have an acquisition that's going to be faster, it's going to be more flexible, and we're going to use things like the FAR instead of the DFAR. So that's one of the benefits that we have. One of the other things that we're going to use is that we have a number of authorities that exist in statute. And both for MARAD and the Department of Transportation, we're going to leverage every single one of those strategies to buy a ship, to convert a ship, to spend money to get that ship to be what the DoD needs to provide that sea lift. 90% of what moves for the Army or Marine Corps to overseas locations comes on a sea lift vessel. So be it in a commercial vessel or a government-owned vessel. And we're going to use both of those. So today I manage about a $2 billion multi-option year contract for ship managers to operate our ships. We're just going into our option years now, and fortunately a bunch of those folks are here today. They're going to come to our industry day on Thursday to talk about how we can recapitalize all of these old ships that we have. We're also going to look at leveraging what we can provide to help recapitalize the ships operated by Military Sea Lift Command. And there's 15 of those ships, and then the entire Maritime Prepositioning Force fleet that we have to help manage that problem. We also have new builds that we're looking at. One of our other missions for MARAD is that we look at the mariner workforce that's existing today and the training of those mariners. And right now we loan 7 ships to state maritime academies and the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. All of those ships are old. All of them need to be recapitalized as well. So we are going to embark on a shipbuilding program. We received money in 2018, $300 million to build one ship. We received money in 2019 to build another. And we're asking for money in 2020 to build a third. Our total need for training ships is 5. The program manager for that, we actually were lucky. We got a Coast Guard retired captain, used to be in their acquisition corps, used to do acquisitions for CBP, so we're leveraging everybody we can. We have the benefit for one of our other program managers. We were able to get from Military Sealift Command, former Navy person. So we're fortunate in that we can reach into a community of people that have skill sets that we need, since we haven't done an acquisition like this since 1994. So when we focus on what the need is, one of the common themes I've heard here is the speed. Moran is trying to do new methods of acquisitions, including what we call a vessel construction manager. And that's a little bit more handoff, where we issue one large contract to a skilled ship owner, ship operator, who has a relationship with a U.S. shipyard and has built a ship in the last 7 years. We're going to use that very good path to try and identify a fast way to get ships in order to replace the existing ships that we have that still have riveted construction. So we're going to use a path that we haven't used before to rapidly advance that acquisition and deliver those ships. Right now, we're actually sharing ships among the maritime academies, and we receive special funding from Congress to do that. So the urgency is there. We have a vehicle that we think is going to work there. We're very close to that award, and it's one method that we're going to use. We're also using that concept to try to get into our new vessel acquisition manager program that we're going to try and start, where we're going to use commercial ship managers, again, with a relationship with their own shipyard, to buy and reflag and convert used vessels to meet the DoD's needs. And it's a way that we can get sealift that we can afford. Again, the urgency is there. Our ships and our fleet are old, and so we're looking at ways to accelerate that path. Right now, our first funding for that program is going to be in FY21, and we know from all of our stakeholders that we are trying to accelerate that into FY20. So I've talked a little bit about some of the ways that we're going to use it, that we're going to use every authority that we have that exists in statute. We have agreements in place with multiple agencies, including Army Corps of Engineers, the Missile Defense Agency, NOAA, and various other organizations. And we're going to use every one of those means to help those people with their recapitalization efforts as well. So with that, sir, I think we're well on the way to answering any questions that you have.
Awesome.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. All right, so now you met us a little bit. So now it's the interactive time. So questions, there's mics out in the building, so please, let's engage in a conversation. That would be great if we could have a little bit of back and forth. I see someone going to a mic, so we'll get this ball rolling.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Alex Wormsley from the Royal United Services Institute in London and a Navy League member. My questions to Admiral Hine, not perhaps surprisingly, you talked about Type 31, which is indeed a program going at absolute breakneck speed. How confident are you, and could you share some more thoughts about how one can increase the pace, decrease the process, but still retain sufficient control to assure yourself of a successful delivery?
Thanks, Alex. I think control is an interesting conversation because actually, and for those of you my team will echo what I'm about to say, being a little bit on the edge of that control, I feel reasonably comfortable with. So I would rather be sort of hurtling towards where I'm trying to get to, feeling a little bit uncomfortable about where we're going, rather than doing the standard acquisition procurement route. The desire for certainty of outcome based on perfect information is just not where we are. So we have to take an element of risk. And again, I'm probably in the sort of slightly more forward-leaning space where I would take probably more risk than most. But I think what we have to say is that the processes that we're going through are not, we haven't avoided or abrogated any responsibility or accountability in our processes. What we've done is we've tried to take the processes that exist, identify those which are essential, and go through those. then identify those which are necessary but can wait, put those in a sequential order rather than necessarily in another set of, do them all in one go. Being absolutely clear with a statement of requirement really early in the process was absolutely clear, was absolutely pivotal to us. So we came up very quickly with a single page of key user requirements. I think there were 13 in total, which actually allowed us to go to industry really, really early in the process and identify with industry what was the art of the possible. Now, we still have to go through all the processes that guarantee safety, assurance, security, and. All of that's entirely fine. But they've got to operate in parallel, not in series. And therefore, we've got to apply the right level of procedural control to start those things rolling as early as we can in the process, and then accept the fact that we may not get it all perfectly right. We may have to go back a bit, we may have to slow down, we may have to stop. And we've had one slight hiccup in the process. That was our own fault, and that was because we were going slightly faster than was necessary. That put about a 5-month delay in the program. But if we hadn't gone really, really quickly and accepted the fact that we got to that point, had to stop, reset, take a 5-month delay, then actually we'd still be talking about a process whereby we might have a ship in service in 10 years, whereas I'm still talking about having a ship in service in 4. Now, am I going to achieve that? I'm not sure, but I'm much more confident that I'm going to get really close, as I said earlier, than I would have been if we'd had this conversation earlier. So I think streamlining the process, the right people in the team, the right level of challenge, the right engagement with industry early on, and an ability and an appetite to take probably a little bit more risk. I think that's the answer to where we've got to so far. Now, for those of you here from industry that are part of the process, you may turn around to me and say, well, it doesn't feel like that from our side. But again, I would challenge those of you in industry to turn around and say, if we don't do this, and this is not what we're trying to do, what is it you want? Do you want a 10-year requirement set conversation, or do you want a 10-month requirement set conversation and the ability to get to contract much more quickly? Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Thank you. Who else do we have out there?
Good afternoon, Admiral. Mike Mann back here. I spent 30 years in the Navy, 8.5 years working for a major defense contractor, and the changes that have taken place in the acquisition process over the last 2 years are dramatic, and I'm all on board. I think it's fantastic. The FFGX program's a model. Really is super. One recommendation, I think it would be really helpful if the Navy would write an RFP to incentivize industry, to give them more innovation, to give you deliver your capabilities faster and on time by writing an RFP that actually provides evaluation criteria to that effect and awards contractors that provide that in their proposal. That's just a food for thought. But what you're talking about, what the Royal Navy's doing, is about on the government side and accepting risk on the government side. My question is, what are you doing to ensure that when it comes time for execution, the contractors are going to deliver without unacceptable risk in execution?
Without unacceptable risk?
Well, so
How about manageable risk?
I offer the F-35 as an example. I mean, how long? There's been a lot of delay in that program that's been in execution. Zumwalt's another example. So how do you get away from that execution risk?
Well, you know, I'll kick it off and then I'll turn it over for comment. But I think you posed two interesting questions. One is, how do we incentivize industry to take more risk, innovate in a contract? And I think we kind of swung the pendulum that way back in you know, the 2000s, right, with the performance-based specifications. Move away from mil specs, let's go to that total performance system spec, and let's give industry the ability to use commercial and go off and meet our very top level requirements. Some cases, we weren't very successful with that, right? Because it wasn't clear enough in terms of what the requirements that we really wanted to go meet. And we spent a lot of time in some of these programs churning, not from the top level requirements, but the specs that get back and forth. So I think what you heard from all of us up today is, hey, we are willing to the last minute share that RFP, engage with industry, have an open dialogue, open conversation about what it is we're trying to buy, and get all of that feedback before we get into that competition, and really, truly understand that requirement spec, you know, or the requirements piece. So, and that gets down to, you know, some of the specifics of what we're trying to buy. And that's why I think we're swinging that pendulum a little bit back to have more of a partnership. Instead of just turning the keys to the car over to industry completely, let's make sure we're having that dialogue, and let's work more jointly, not only in the establishment, understand the requirements, but the execution thereof and our contracts, right? And I mean, firm fixed price incentive, let's share. Where's the risk? Where's the share line? We have those debates all the time, and I think industry goes back and forth. Some would rather have a fixed price and let us go figure out where the profit line is ourselves by our execution. Some would rather have the cost plus, and so it really depends on the acquisition, obviously, but that conversation we should be having early and often and not in isolation. So thoughts, comments from panel?
Perhaps if I, very quickly, I mean, I think we should be really clear about what kind of risk we're talking about. The only risk that we're talking about that's important to me is the warfighting risk and my ability to deliver platforms to the warfighter at sea on time with the right capability. The risk that you're talking about in industry is financial. They're completely different things. It's like comparing apples and Wednesdays. So we need to be clear that when we're talking about taking risk in this space, we're talking about the risk to the delivery of the warfighting capability. The industrial risk, I'm slightly sort of ambivalent about, recognizing that the whole audience here is not. We also need to be really clear about then managing the contract, because one of the things we're really good at and we're very clever at is setting the requirement. We've decided what the shiny thing is that we want, and we all go away. We spend a long time working it out. We agree the contract, and then we stop doing anything with it until we then accept it. And we don't, if you were managing your sort of programs or projects at home, you wouldn't hand over a bucket of money and then say, I'll be back in 2 years. Hopefully you've done what you said you did. And if you haven't, then we'll worry about it at that point. You manage it all the way through. One of the things that we do in the Navy we're not very good at is managing the contract on a day-to-day basis, making sure that every single thing we get is about the value of the pound. Whatever it says on the contract, I want, and I want to make sure that's what we're getting, not what we think we're going to get, or not indeed what industry thinks it's going to give us. I want to know how we're going to deliver exactly what it says on the tin.
Yeah, well, I'd say I'm comforted by the fact that the issues that everybody is wrestling with and the way they're sort of attacking is consistent with the thought pattern that I have, and it's not intuitive that having more meetings earlier would make your programs go faster, but we have indeed found that that's the case. So we're definitely moving down that way. But I'll tell you that it's really, I mean, I honestly take it back to making sure that we're all on the same page and we're partnering together. And there's this great exercise that we went through at another class where they told you to grasp hands, and the winner would be the person who, you know, hit the other person's hand on the table the most times in 10 seconds or something like that. So I'm there with a guy, and he thinks it's an arm wrestling contest, and so he literally is leaning in and trying to push my arm down. And then the people who won, I think he got my hand down twice. The people who won got it 100 times because they both heard the requirement clearly, and they just did like this and counted to 100, and that was the time. And so, you know, while he's really trying to get at whatever his objective is, it wasn't what the requirement was. And so, you know, I'm hold up, wait a second. Let's be clear about what he's saying. He's not saying we have to do a tug of war. It's how many times can we touch the table? Focus on the end mission goal. And so we always embed a team in whatever acquisition program we're doing at the contractor site and really are with them every day, part of the risk meetings, part of the things. And that's how we get at understanding where we are in the program at any given time and provide that feedback early and often, so you make minor adjustments rather than major adjustments over time. So that's how we get at it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'll just pull the string one more time and then get to the next question. But, you know, Secretary Gertz said it. You know, we can't go at speed with our current acquisitions. We got to change some of the foundations. And I think for the programs that we're talking about here, getting back into the model-based systems engineering, developing those models, and we have several examples of some pretty good programs that are moving at speed based on really that modeled and engineering environment where we're trading with the industry partners on a daily basis, engineering, technology, and really making real-time decisions instead of what we do today in a lot of cases, the back and forth with procedurals that are hundreds and hundreds of pages, and hey, industry goes ahead, it writes it, submits it, it takes forever to go ahead and review it, and now you find yourself months and months behind. If we can get into real-time decision-making under a new platform that is digitally driven in a model environment, that's the way we're going to go at scale and speed for some of the stuff we're talking about. And just an example, I'll give you one, is the LRASM program for the United States Navy. IOC'd on the B-1 in only 4 years. Really a very complex, complicated weapon that would typically, if you look back on history, what it takes to deliver those kind of weapons is an 8 to 9 year cycle. That IOC'd early on B-1, then planned, and only 4 years it's about the IOC on F-18, much more quickly, robust engagement between industry and our government teams, sharing the models, enabling real-time decision-making. That's a must for us. That's just a must. Next questions.
Joe Martin, Navy League member. You talked about having the right people, and certainly Secretary Gertz and the other distinguished panel members made many of the same points. Can you talk a little bit about, and this is an open question to the whole panel, can you talk a bit about the state of the meritocracy within the acquisition workforce writ large, and then what you might think about doing to improve the meritocracy going forward to deliver on some of these very bold ambitions?
Start with you guys down the end.
Sure. So I think what we're finding is, and I deal in the FAR, so we're fortunate in that respect. But what we've found is I'm going to use people who are skilled in the skill that I need at that moment in time. And so we'll reach out to anyone that we can find in terms of, I need them in my organization, and if I can't get them fast enough, I'm going to find them in another organization and seek to use that way to get to that capability. So that's probably the focus that I have. We look at the fastest way that we can get the capability in-house. We're also seeing, though, that there is much more interaction now between our program staff and our acquisition staff, and within the Department of Transportation, there's a little bit more focus on what the end outcome was going to be. So we try to focus that the end goal is the highest goal that we're all going to work together towards. And sometimes there's, I won't say parochialness, but there's friction. And so we try to manage that as best we can at the program level and mitigate it and tamp it down.
Well, I'll just say, you know, Department of Navy, 60, 70,000 acquisition workforce strong. Probably the best acquisition workforce I've ever seen. Does that mean we don't need new skills and new retraining and those type of things in that environment? No. I think there are some new skills and new people that we need from a data scientist area, artificial intelligence. You know, there's a lot of new capabilities and things that are coming down that we need to have expertise in that workforce, and we need to partner with industry for that expertise as well. But the acquisition force we have today is, I think, the best that's out there. On the Marine Corps side, I can tell you on the military side, it's been out there for a little over 10 years. And actually, those that are getting promoted in the acquisition side in the Marine Corps are surpassing those not in the acquisition side. So it's you know, the parity with the other side of the warfighting realm is doing very, very well. So I'm excited for what the workforce holds in the future. I think we need to get after some new skills and new retraining, but it's doing well.
Yeah, let me give you two examples. I talked culture earlier, and it's really important. We're trying to get after this because we're still somewhat embedded in our compliant nature of it, or as our bureaucracy that we are. We unfortunately by nature, see somebody do something well, we want to capture it, how to go do it, we write it down, we build checklists, and then the next team goes ahead and tries to replicate that. But every acquisition is different. So we're trying to change the culture and mindset that we've got to get after and treat each one individually. And one example that comes to mind, because there was a question for Secretary Gertz, you incentivize. And I think the incentive comes when the team wins and the team delivers. And I'm going to pick on a team that's here because they're pretty excited about it. But I will tell you, there was a program that Admiral Harris, PACOM, had an issue, had a concern, a gap that he couldn't meet. And his concern was the acquisition community writ large was too slow to respond to his need. And a couple of us say, hey, give us an opportunity, give us a chance. So we came back with a challenge. We had 11 months to go meet his need. We stood up one team. In 2006, this team, they came back. They had a month to go put a plan together. They came back, and here's the compliance culture. They came back and said, sir, here's our plan. It takes 4 years. It takes 4 years. We're going to have all this testing done. We're going to do all this stuff in tax. We're going to make it 1,000% perfect in 4 years. And here's how much it's going to cost. Right? And I said, what don't you guys understand about 11 months? So we changed teams. We gave it to 206s and said, you are weapons free. Go challenge the system. Take on the system and go deliver this capability. They delivered in 8 months. Not 4 years, 8 months. It's in theater today, working. Partnered with industry. Side by side, delivered out in the squadron site. Not back in the test site, back out at the squadron. Trust. Trust with the CEO of the squadron, with the team. They accepted less than perfect, but they delivered the capability that the Admiral required, and it's in theater today working. And it's going to iterate and inform us on future acquisitions, the technology. That's what Secretary Gertz is getting at. That drove this team sitting right down here that took IRST. 3 years ago, didn't get through a milestone review for LRIP. And some people say IRST is failing. That was 3 years ago. And you heard Secretary Gertz, this team sitting right at this table, just gave it to the fleet who just took out a target 4.5 years early because they took on the challenge. So we talk about authorities, we talk about processes. Everybody in this room has a way to get acquisition better. What I'll tell you, put the right people in charge, empower them, give them the authorities, and let them tackle it. There are examples out there that happen every day. And the incentive is the victory that they realize by delivering to the warfighter what they need. And I look at this table right here. They're ready for the next challenge. And they're going to proliferate that throughout the organization. That's where Secretary Gertz, when he says he's a big guy with the big neck and he's trying to open up holes, he means it. He's going to take on the system, the people who say no, and enable a team like this to be successful. But the happiest people right now, because of what this team did, is the fleet. Because they have a one-of-a-kind capability now that is game-changing. So thank you guys for what you did. And if you couldn't hear it, they were just saying leadership stepped up to the plate and took on the burden of risk and shared that, across industry. I will tell you a couple of those phone calls with industry. It wasn't a contract, let's write all this contract language out. Oh my God, what are we going to do? It was a handshake. Let's get our people out on site and let's go work the software real time. Things that we just haven't done in the past. You guys did it though. Question?
Actually, this is one for Mr. Williford. Mr. Kendrick actually told me to ask you this question after the cyber panel this morning. But with the recent emphasis on the NIST 800-171 security standards, how do you see the standards being enforced, especially with the small non-traditional contractors? And is DOD looking to come up with a third party to certify that the small non-traditional contractors are meeting the NIST standards?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so as an acquisition professional, we talk about cost, schedule, and performance, right? I think what we're looking at in the future is cost, schedule, performance, and security. Because one of the challenges I think we have on the cyber side is the security of our defense industrial base, our security, and all those things wrapped up together. And I think what the question was about is that OSD has mandated for industry, both small business all the way up to primes and large, to come back with a RMF capability, risk management framework that says, here's where we are in all the NIST level controls on our current network. I remember when I was coming up in the acquisition world that we provided industry with desktops and laptops, and they rode on our network, not on their own network. We've changed that paradigm because of cost, and because of cost, we put that onus back on industry. So what I think is going to end up happening is I think there will be a third party. Today, I think DMCA is standing up to take that role as having that third party review, but they're looking at the primes today, and so you're talking, multitude of industry partners out there, and so OSD and the community are working on a way to put those pieces together and how we're going to do that. It's going to, again, be a partnership and a communication between us and industry to be able to provide what is that right solution, what is a cost-effective solution, so that we all benefit from it. But again, I think it's going cost, schedule, performance, and security in the future.
Awesome. Any other comments on that question? I'll just add, this is a topic at SecDef level, almost every other month, where we're getting at what are we going to do, and we are fully partnered with industry. And I hope everyone in this room understands how serious this challenge is. Our adversaries are stealing our stuff every day. Every day. Across our supply chain, any which way they can get their hands on it. We have to stop it. Have to. So appreciate all the stuff that everyone's doing, but we're all in this together. And it just has to end, and we got to figure out jointly ways to get at solving this problem. Okay, questions?
Yeah, he was my ringer up there with the standards front. One of the main challenges that we have right now is the old proverb goes, we have 100 competing standards, let's make one standard to rule them all. We have 101 competing standards. A lot of times we have our program managers that get incentivized to try to maintain as many versions of software, as many versions of a product that's out there in order to make sure that the standards that they pick can get met. When are we ever going to start going down the road what the major software providers are doing and starting to retire software? When we say, for instance, that no, the C-130 will no longer take DAFIF 6, when DAFIF 9 is now out, when will we incentivize the maintainers to simply say, we're going to put a box from the Air Force into the Marine Corps C-130, so we do not have to strip data out and therefore take a less effective mission planning system that we have? How do we go about squaring that circle and taking the standards all the way and modernizing them instead of just building more and more and then having confusion?
Okay.
So I think that goes to 2 points. One is the leadership question that we had from the table down here, that actually we need to be able to understand what it is we're trying to achieve, and we need to be able to take more risk right the way through the organization. The second thing I would say is that this plays to the heart of a conversation we're having about the difference between purchase and procure. We are able to procure, and we apply a procurement set of strategies and rules to just about everything. And we work out how that's going to cost through life and the cycle from flash to bang, etc. Purchase, there are some things we just need to go and buy. And we need to recognize that they're disposable, expendable, they just need to be changed. My team, again, will laugh, but one of my personal hobby horses is we are currently spending an inordinate sum of money in the United Kingdom on a Ministry of Defence-wide computer system. And I can't get a Surface Pro and a secret telephone. And we're spending billions and billions of pounds. And so more and more of our communications are being done on Skype and WhatsApp, and we're bypassing the system, but we're still buying the system. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So we've got to have to find a way of thinking about how we recognize that there are some things now that are purchase, dispose, remove, that aren't subject to the same procurement laws and rules that we've managed to create over time. Otherwise, we just will never move out.
Yeah, we moved to this product line or structure, if you will, for capabilities rather than a asset-based capability acquisition. And so we may acquire an asset, but the capabilities that it brings to the table, that comes in through a different avenue, and that product line is providing that capability across the fleet for consistency from a logistics sustainment perspective. And we've been enforcing that, I think, in the last 5 years or so, and so it's just now sort of getting into the field. But the Aegis Common Source Library is a great example of that. Minotaur system, which is a C4I system on the aircraft, is a great example of that, and we have found tremendous amounts of savings in that paradigm. And so stretching it and growing it across other capabilities as we mature that is definitely on the roadmap for where we intend to go.
Sure, I think where we face a challenge, we will reach out to our partner in industry and say, help me come up with a solution. We can't keep up with the speed of technology on a really old fleet, so we need somebody to come up with a better way to get there. What we found is that we may not have a very systemic, fleet-wide approved system that is standardized across 46 platforms. We don't think we can even get there in this day and age. So what we'll identify is my one contractor who owns or manages 5 of my ships will come to me with a solution, and we'll fund and resource that solution on that specific block of ships, and then we'll move to the next problem set. So the old way that we used to look at things and do a fleet-wide upgrade for everything, and it was very time-consuming. There's no speed in managing that nowadays, and we found that we've had to come up with other ways. So we're giving up some control to our partners and having them bring a solution to us.
Yeah, I'll just, the common source baseline age is just an example, and your question's spot on. We've got to get out of the game because it's just unaffordable to maintain the software code the way we do it today. We just have not invested in the tools, but Secretary Gertz once again mentioned Aegis, as was just talked about here by Mike. What he didn't say, when we built a virtual twin, we put it on Hudner and fired a weapon that took out a drone using the digital twin, so virtualized software, pretty impressive. The first time it missed, the day prior, it missed. But what was amazing about it was that team on the ship was able to go back, replay the event with the tools they had with the virtual twin, find out what went wrong, recoded the software on the ship, had it re-verified, ran multiple emulations overnight, got approval, which is unheard of, through the process, our WeServe process, to fire a weapon again. Normally for us, that's a 6 to 8 month process to get us software recoded, recertified to go fire. They fired 24 hours later, had a direct hit. That's the tools, that's the investment we're just starting to make, and we have to get at it. You're exactly right. Those are the transitions we have to make if we're going to go at scale and at speed, as the Secretary spoke of. That's a great question.
I'm Bertiel van Geel, the Netherlands Air Attaché in Washington, D.C. And I heard you talk about accepting risk if we want faster acquisition. And I am fully on board with that. I understand that. And also, Mr. Roper, the Secretary for the Air Force, is also on the same sheet of music in that regard. So that's good. My question is, we can all understand it and accept that risk. However, we have, and I'm talking now for the Netherlands, but also other European countries, we have political masters that are a kind of risk averse. How can we convince our political masters that risk is acceptable?
So I would say that what we have to have is a very well-scoped program. I'm fortunate in that our objectives for the program to provide sea lift to the Department of Defense is very well defined. So what my challenge is I'm a small agency within a large department. I have to make sure that my department understands that and that I can and have them informed at the highest levels to have the discussion with SecDef or SecNavy. So for me, it's a internal function to get that knowledge up to my leadership, to have them have that really well understood and common understanding of what our role is. We have a defined role. We have really clear objectives of what service or what capability we provide.
I think that's really interesting because I think that's a really healthy tension. So I don't see that as a problem. It's not our job to second guess the political consequences of what we're trying to achieve. That's why the politicians are in charge and we are subservient. And therefore, it's for us to provide the politicians with options and an associated level of risk, and then the politicians decide what level of risk they're prepared to take. But we should always not self-censure. We should not be trying to give them the answer that we think that they want, or indeed the answer that we think that they may well get to, recognizing political constraints. We should give them pure military advice that allows them to take whatever level of risk they feel is appropriate at the political level.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'd say I got careful with it's not reckless risk, right? It's we got to do our due diligence to understand the risk and mitigate it. And, you know, one of the 06s we had running one of these programs, he used to have a little phrase, right? Hey, we're not running with scissors. You know, swords are drawn. We're being very smart in understanding our risk and managing it at speed with our industry partners. So we got to be able to explain that to those who question or have concerns, and they should, in a healthy tension environment, ask and challenge us in those questions. But we can't be afraid, because there's no way. I don't even care if you're going to deliver something in 15 years. There's going to be risk accepted at some level. Our requirement as acquisition professionals is to understand where that risk is and how best to mitigate it and what steps to take to show leadership that we have that under control. So I agree with that. Any more questions? Come on, we got 4 minutes. We got time for at least one more good question. There we go. Awesome.
I'm Gus Anderson. I'm with OSD Cape and a proud member of the bureaucracy. How do you measure your toleration for failure? How do you put a scale on your risk?
How do you put your scale on the risk? I would say it really depends on the warfighting risk. So I was in a really good meeting. I'll answer this, I'll turn it over to you, because that's a great question. We in the building sit down and we look at risk from an acquisition standpoint. You know, are we going to go over budget? Are we going to be delayed? Are we not going to solve technology? I think we need to start bringing in the equation, what is the warfighting risk if we don't deliver? And so I was in a meeting the other day when we were talking about accepting risk or not on a program that needed more time for software maturity, or do we redesign some of the components of the particular weapon we were talking about, the weapon system. And the fleet got on and said, hey, that's great, you're all talking about that, and you're so willing to move things right and accept more money risk, but how about us? Because tomorrow we may be called into harm's way, and we need that thing to go win. So I think it really begins with the risk of the environment in which we're trying to meet the demand from the fleet. And I think that does change the risk tolerances level we're willing to take. And I will tell you, it begins with trust. I mean, I look at this team right here, and I've looked at several other teams. There was a day 20 years ago where we would go out and share with the fleet technologies that weren't fully baked, 75, 65%, and let and learn. Everyone understood there was a trust. We got away from that because we didn't trust anybody anymore. So we wanted to go make sure everything was perfect. I think what we're swinging the pendulum back to, what this team did, is get something out there everyone understands may not be perfect yet, but it's a game changer. And if we have to go fight the fight tonight, they're taking that thing. And they're going to win with that thing. And it's not perfect. It will be perfect in 4 years, right? It'll be perfect in 4 years. So I think that risk tolerance, we have to add the warfighting complexity, the risk that we're asking our warfighters to take when we balance our decisions on how much risk we're willing to take. Over.
I just echo everything Mike said. I mean, this is about the output risk, and the output risk is that which we're trying to deliver warfighting capability to the front line. The input risk that we're talking about here is completely different, and it's not unimportant, but it's not as important as what we're trying to achieve. Everybody here in this room is trying to deliver warfighting capability to the front line. The input, money, people, process, that's all the same, and we can muck about with that, but we've got to recognize actually what we're trying to achieve, and therefore the risk, come back to the risk is at the end, not at the front of the process.
Yeah, I agree. Risk always has to be in context of the mission, and And all risk is not an issue yet, it's a risk. And so therefore it has some mitigation and you can track its trend. Is the risk getting larger or is it getting less? And I think that's a story that we can certainly articulate with some measure of validity.
I think, minimum viable capability I talked about earlier. And so what we're trying to do is not take all the risk out, but be able to manage the risk that we put out there. Risk is inherent in our business and what we do on a daily basis, but we've got to make sure that we provide capability out there. On another weapon system that I worked on before, there was, the CNO made a decision. There was zero capability out there today, and we put out 40 to 50% capability to the fleet. That gave us a whole lot better than we had previously. So sometimes you have to take that risk to give capability out there to the fleet so that we can win.
The last thing I'll say is that it's the risk of what happens if I don't attempt it. So we have to go and push the limit of the program as far and as fast as we can. If we don't, what's going to fail when I can't at least deliver part of the capability or deliver a ship that has some element of it's going to work good enough when I have to deliver it on a timeline. So what is our risk to failure if I can't at least attempt it?
Yeah, thanks. I'm just going to wrap it up because I think we're out of time. I think that's a great question to ask on risk. We talked a lot about risk. If we're going to go at speed and we're going to scale it, can we do it and accept the risk? And we all talk about that. Anyone who knows me, I got to tell you, when I sit down and do a program review, I don't care who it is, I'll spend almost all my time on risk and opportunities. I want to understand it. I will tell you almost immediately if a program has their ducks in a row or not, if they understand their risks and there's opportunities they're seeking. A good program team each and every day is finding opportunities to find schedule and reduce cost each and every day. And if they're doing that and they understand their risks, I have complete confidence they have handle on their program to execute. And we got to get to that point where everybody's executing in that regard. So thanks to the panel very much. Please a round of applause for your panel. And thanks very much for your engagement and your questions. They were really, really good. Thanks very much. Have a great conference. Thank you.